Welcome to Purpose Driven Church for Unificationists. We're on day 10, myth number 5, which is if you are dedicated enough, your church will grow. So, Rick Warren here is talking about the myth that if you are just dedicated enough and you just work hard enough and you pray hard enough and you give scripturally sound messages enough, that your church will grow. And he says he's seen many pastors frustrated because they go to conferences and they're told this, but they feel like they're already doing it. They're working hard. They're giving these biblically based messages and they're praying, but they're not seeing the results. And I think that this applies to us too, because we have very dedicated leaders, people who work at headquarters, people who work in different church affiliate organizations, and pastors. I don't think there's any lack of dedication there. They're some of the most dedicated people I've ever met. And they definitely are not lacking in hard work, in prayer, and devotion, and conditions. But yet, we're not seeing a lot of results from that. So maybe there's something here for us to look at. He goes on to say that it takes more than dedication to lead a church to grow. It also takes skill. He says that one of his favorite verses is Ecclesiastes 10:10. If the axe is dull and its edge unsharpened, more strength is needed, but skill will bring success. Notice that God says skill, not just dedication, will bring success. If I have wood to chop, I'll do a better job by sharpening my axe first. The point is, work smarter, not harder. It's interesting that he brings up that example because when I was living in Missouri with my in-laws, I had to help with some of the housework, pull my weight, I guess you could say. And part of that was chopping wood for the furnace. And my father-in-law has been chopping wood for the furnace for, I don't know, 20, 30 years or whatever it is. And, he's in his 60s now and he's still doing it, and, it's really quite amazing to see, especially when you try to do it yourself and you realize how hard it is. It's really hard work. But especially the first time I did it, it was so difficult and I couldn't split the wood and I kept missing, and even if I hit it, it would bounce off, and it was really frustrating because here I am, this young man in my early 30s, and I can't do this thing that this man in his 70s or 60s is doing. But I recognize that once I got the technique down, once I learned the skills and how to hit them and how to swing the axe a certain way, then it became much easier. And I relied a lot less on my muscles and my strength, and a lot more on just doing it the right way. And I found that I could be a lot more effective that way. So it was kind of an interesting experience that kind of reminds me of what he's talking about here. He also goes on to say that sometimes we focus so much on the spiritual aspect of church growth that we don't always recognize that there are other important aspects of it too. He goes on to say, for example, that it's sometimes difficult to say, to challenge a concept because it sounds almost unspiritual. For example, he says somebody needs to state the obvious. Prayer alone will not grow a church. Some of the greatest prayer warriors I know are pastors and members of dying churches. Of course, he goes on to say that prayer is really important. He doesn't want us to get the wrong impression that he doesn't believe prayer is important. He has people praying for him during every one of his 4 services that he gives at Saddleback Church on Sunday. And he also says that prayerless church is a powerless church. But he also adds that, there is a time and a place for everything. One time God told Joshua to stop praying about his failure and get up and correct the cause of it. Joshua 7. There is a time to pray and there is a time to act responsibly. Sometimes it's not good enough to just pray about something. Sometimes you need to go, and if there's a problem with a person, or a misunderstanding or hurt feelings, you have to go to that person and you have to fix it. You have to deal with it. You have to address those things. Prayer isn't going to make that happen for you. He also goes on to say that we have to be careful to avoid 2 extreme positions in ministry. One is what they call practical humanism, and one is called pious irresponsibility. Basically saying that one concept is that everything depends on what I do. So if my effort will depict the outcome. And the other one is that I can't control anything. God is in control. It doesn't matter what I do. God's going to grow the church, or God is going to, make this thing happen if it's important to him. So he just emphasizes that, first of all, the church is not a business. It's not just about organization and management and marketing, but there's also a spiritual aspect of things. And if your church is the kind of place that, is just a Sunday school, an efficient organization, and a budget, then, you know, what is the point of that? Because the whole point of being in a spiritual or organization or a church or whatever community is that you want to see God working, and you want to see lives being changed. You want to see God moving within the things that you are doing, and making changes and inspiration in people's lives. But we also have to avoid the idea that we can't do anything, because he points out very clearly, and also uses many Bible verses, God wants to work through people. God works through people. And of course, we know this in the divine principle as a very um, uh, kind of a bedrock of our faith, that God needs people. Not just that God wants to work through people or God chooses to work through people, but God set it up that way. God set it up to work through people because we have our own responsibility, and God's hands are tied unless we do the things that we need to do. So, I believe that that concept is very principled, even though it maybe doesn't agree with many Christian ways of thinking. But he ends this section with this phrase: "While we wait for God to work for us, God is waiting to work through us."